Okay, let's talk about the methodology that will be employed throughout the semester. And I'm hoping that this will optimize your learning. So there's a big discussion about the difference between knowledge and skills, and knowledge is certainly important and in many cases a prerequisite to using skills. But to really understand things, there's a growing belief that skills are at least as important and oftentimes more important than just simple knowledge. So I'm going to try to incorporate both the process of where we cover a concept and then we apply it through a variety of techniques. We'll apply it through graded assignments, we'll apply it through in-class exercises, and then there'll be quizzes, and then you'll get a chance to present the learnings. And then we'll start over again with the concept, assignments, quiz, etc. So I'm hoping that through this process that you'll get a chance to do a lot of hands-on. And I think that's really important in a financial accounting course. So the first topic we're going to talk about are the types of organizations and forms of ownership. This is important because when we think about accounting, we're thinking about applying it to organizations. So let's get a firm understanding of what we mean by that, and then we'll talk about the forms of ownership. So when we talk about types of organization, there's really three kinds here. I know there's four listed here, but I'm going to deal with this fourth one, nonprofit, in the not in this types of organization, but in terms of forms of legal ownership. So really the three types of organizations that we're going to focus on throughout the semester are manufacturing organizations. Those are organizations that make a product. They're merchandising organization. Those are organizations that resell other products that are made by the manufacturers. So these can be either wholesalers or retailers. And there's also service firms. And service firms are those that basically don't sell a product but provide a service. Now there is a fourth type of firm as well, which is a hybrid. So some firms do a combination of things. That can be a manufacturer and a merchandiser, or manufacturer and a service firm, etc. So let's make sure that we clearly understand what each of these types of businesses are. So a service business sells services to customers. So a law firm, accounting firm, painting company, a merchandising company, basically resells other people's products, other companies' products to consumers. So grocery stores, automobile dealerships, and then manufacturing companies typically manufacture products. So they buy raw materials, they have people working on assembling them, they finish them to a certain level, sometimes a finished good, and then they sell them either directly to consumers or oftentimes through these merchandising companies, either wholesalers or retailers. So those are the three basic types. And when we think about nonprofits, a nonprofit are often service-based, but they can be any one of these types of companies. So we'll talk about nonprofit when we talk about the legal structure of companies in a few minutes. So there's some more verbiage here around the different types of organizations. I would suggest that you read through the slides I provide. I'm not going to read off these slides on every topic, but essentially when we think about the three types of companies, we're going to focus on service, merchandising, and manufacturing. So I'm going to flip through these next couple of slides. And we're going to talk now about forms of ownership. So when somebody starts a business or an organization, then they essentially can do it in one of what we'll call 5 legal ways or forms of ownership. Somebody could be a sole proprietor, they can enter into a partnership, they could have a corporation, they could have a limited liability company or corporation, the term is used interchangeably, or they could become a nonprofit. So let's take a look at what is meant by these different types of forms of ownership. So a sole proprietor is basically a business that's owned and operated by one person that's not incorporated. And there are advantages and disadvantages. When we look at the sole proprietorship, they today are estimated to represent 70% of the businesses in the United States. So it's a significant portion of all the businesses that are out there are one-person operations. So you're doing everything. You're doing the sales, the marketing, the accounting, if you're manufacturing, the service, etc. So let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages. Easy to form. So sometimes you need to notify your local government or get a license. Sometimes you can just start it up. You have flexibility. You're the boss, and you own everything. So you don't have to ask for approval. And the other thing about sole proprietorships is it's only taxed once. So it's taxed at your ordinary income. So typically, somebody who is a sole proprietor will file what's called a Schedule C on their tax returns, and that Schedule C will become part of their individual tax return. So disadvantages. So the biggest disadvantage of a sole proprietorship is that there's something called unlimited liability, which basically means that your business is not separated from your individual assets from a legal perspective. So if your business has a serious defect in their product and somebody's hurt, or you hurt somebody in the course of your business, then that person can pursue your individual assets. And so that's one of the reasons why most attorneys would tell you not to be a sole proprietor, because you don't have the protection the corporations have of being a separate legal entity. The other thing about sole proprietorship is that, it's one person. So, there's a lot of thinking that we benefit by having partners and other people involved in the business to give us ideas, give us energy. And so, so there's limited talent versus, going out and doing with other people. The other thing that happens is that if the business owner gets disabled or dies, then the business legally ends at that point. So, but, most popular type of business and one that is easy to start up. So the next type is a partnership. And really the only difference between a partnership and a sole proprietorship is that it involves more than one person. So again, unlimited liability, again, relatively easy to start up, but oftentimes don't need to file legal paperwork. So when we look at types of businesses, about 10% of businesses in the United States are partnerships. Advantages: easy to form, you get more management skills than a sole proprietor. Often you don't have to deal with a lot of government red tape. And also in terms of taxation, it's single taxation. So the profits are distributed to the individual partners and they're taxed at their individual rates. So it has some of the disadvantages that a sole proprietorship has. So limited ability to raise money, potentially unlimited legal liability for acts and debts, and so forth. So the next form is a corporation. So corporations in the United States are actually considered separate legal entities. And so one of the big advantages of incorporating is that you get to protect your personal assets from your business. So if you start a business, and it could be a one-person business or it could be a one with many people, you essentially, you protect your personal assets from your business assets. And there are a lot of legal requirements, though, in terms of setting up corporations. So you have to file with the state, you have to have a charter, you have to have a board of directors. So there is a lot of legal requirements that come with corporations. And then as corporations grow, they can decide to do things like issue stock. And issuing stock means that I can raise money by having people invest in my company. So if you think about the big companies that we're all familiar with, Facebook and Google and Apple, they're all publicly traded, so they're corporations that sell stock to the general public and institutions, and so anybody can own a piece of them, and so it's much easier to raise money. So advantages and disadvantages. So advantage, you can raise money. Investors are liable only for investments, so you're not liable for your personal assets are not at risk. It's easy to transfer ownership from one person to another by selling stock. And as the corporation grows, and particularly if it becomes a large corporation, then you have the opportunity to bring in a broad range of ideas and talent. So it takes to form a corporation, typically you're going to have to hire an attorney. You have to file paperwork and approved by the state, and then you have to abide by the laws of the state and the Internal Revenue Service, etc. And then one of the big disadvantages is this idea of double taxation. So in the traditional forms of corporation, what happens is that the corporation is taxed at the corporate rate. And then if the earnings are distributed to the shareholders and they distribute it by something called dividends, then the individual is also taxed on that dividend. So that's that idea of double taxation. So 20% of businesses, but 74% of profits in the United States are incorporated. So almost every major company, and honestly, I can't think of a major company that's not a corporation. So one of the things that has come up recently is, so we'll come back and talk about this idea of common stock versus preferred stock, but this is if you want to own a piece of Apple or a piece of Walt Disney or Google, then you can go to a stockbroker or you go online and you can buy a share or multiple shares of common stock, and you become a voting owner of that company. You may not be a significant owner, but nevertheless, you own a piece of that company. So what's happened in over the last 20 years is this idea of limited liability companies or limited liability corporations. So I've heard the term used interchangeably. But basically, states have allowed people to go ahead and form what they call limited liability. So I can be a sole proprietor or partner, but I have the benefits of incorporating. So my personal assets are protected, and I'm only taxed once, because at the end of the year, whatever earnings that limited liability company has, then they distribute it to the owner or owners, the partners. So, so many companies now are starting to, that traditionally may not have been incorporated, will now go to this limited liability company. It's easier to set up than a traditional corporation. Does not require all the bells and whistles. It protects the personal assets of the person or persons, and it also does not require double taxation. So this has become a very, very popular form of business. So you'll often see at the end of a firm's name LLC, or sometimes LLP, which is limited liability partnership. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about nonprofits. So nonprofits are given special status in the United States, and so there's really four. First of all, what's a nonprofit as opposed to a for-profit company? So does it mean that a nonprofit does not make profit? And the answer to that is no. So really, what the benefit of being declared a nonprofit, and you need IRS approval and state approval, is that you are exempt from many taxes. Okay, so the idea behind a nonprofit is that it's a trust, and it's a custodian of assets that have been dedicated to the public good. So most institutions of education are nonprofits. Most healthcare institutions, hospitals, are nonprofits. And then there's a variety of social service agencies and the like that are nonprofits. And then there's other things popping up. But basically, you have to convince the Internal Revenue Service and the state that you operate in that you are dedicated to serving the public good. So the four guiding principles are they are organized and operate exclusively for exempt purposes, no private benefit. So what that basically means is I can't pay dividends, I can't do profit sharing. The assets are permanently dedicated to exempt purposes. So whatever you set up your public good for, education, feed the poor, try to solve a healthcare problem, they have to remain dedicated to that purpose. So I can't start to divert them for other interests. And there's also some limitations on what you can or cannot do for people running for public office. So the biggest advantage of a tax exempt or nonprofit is that you're exempt from most taxes. And you can also set it up in a way that you are protected in terms of liability. So you can set it up as a corporation, and a tax exempt or nonprofit corporation is probably the most prevalent type of nonprofit, although you can certainly set it up in other ways. So, there are many nonprofits out there, and when we start to examine the financial statements of companies, we'll first focus in on the for-profit companies that are publicly traded and issue stock because their financial statements are readily available to us. But we'll also take a look at some nonprofits, including our own university here, MCPHS. And we'll take a look at what the income statement of MCPHS looks like. And I think you'll be a little bit surprised by the results when we get to that. So there's some more that you can read here on nonprofits. Again, I'm not going to read through every slide in this deck of slides, but anything that I put in my slides, you can assume that I may test you on. So, all right. So let's go on to the next topic.